It's episode 196 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. You can find all of the shows at hankgarner.com. And while you're there, please subscribe. There's links in the right-hand sidebar. Today I'd like to thank some sponsors. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned, episode 16 is out. The very best in pulp fiction. The 16th issue of Tales from the Canyons of the Damned consists of 5 sharp, suspenseful, thought-provoking, short time travel-themed stories, each from a different featured master of speculative fiction. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned. Also, Dominion Rising, with 23 all-original science fiction and epic fantasy novels. Dominion Rising is the box set of the year. The collection features nearly 8,000 pages and over 1 million words in total, bringing you sharp, suspenseful, and thought-provoking novels of dark forces and light, of magic and adventure, of enchanted swords and galactic empires. Dominion Rising, pre-order today for only 99 cents. Galactic Satori Chronicles by Nick Breaker and Paul E. Hicks. A thirst for revenge sends one man on a deadly journey through the galaxy in the adrenaline-pumping new novel Galactic Satori Chronicles. Book 1 and Book 2 are now available. Some of the very best in science fiction and a guaranteed epic beach read. Pick up Books 1, Earth, and Book 2, Kron, by authors Nick Breaker and Paul E. Hicks. I'd also like to thank my good friend Ed Gosney for sponsoring the show. Ed's blog, Cool Comics in My Collection, is a weekly trip down memory lane that is more than just nostalgia. I guarantee you'll learn something you didn't know before. Ed is also an unbelievably great writer, and his book Prometheus Stumbles is on sale for just 99 cents until June 20th. Or grab the audiobook available on audible.com. Pick it up, it carries the Author Story seal of approval. As always, we have an audio clip from Richard Gleaves' Jason Crane series at the end of the show. You'll want to be sure to stick around for that. Before we get into our great interview today, here's a word from our newest sponsor, Amy Hale. Thank you for listening.
The Shadows Trilogy from Amy Hale. All 3 books are now available on all ebook platforms as well as paperback. Colt Henderson is a man who lives for the moment. His past has taught him that life is unpredictable and often disappointing. A confirmed bachelor, he believes that love only exists in fairy tales. She's lost, scared, and can't remember a thing about her past or her identity. She senses all is not as it should be, but without her memory, how does she know what to fear and what to trust? Because of her status as a Jane Doe, she names herself Jane and works to put her life back together. In the process, she learns that she possesses unique abilities that certain people will kill for. Fate throws Colt and Jane together, but they both have a lot to learn about forgiveness and acceptance. Colt's determination and Jane's remarkable gifts will send them on a journey that they never expected. To survive, they will need each other, but sometimes facts are scarier than fiction, and the truth is better left unknown. The Shadows Trilogy by Amy Hale. Pick up the entire trilogy today.
Now on to our interview with Neal Stephenson and Nicole Galland. We had some minor technical difficulties when we merged the calls together to get both of them on the line. So about 11 minutes into the interview, we had to switch over to telephone instead of a computer, and the call quality is not as good as the first part, but I think you'll enjoy it all the same. Thanks for listening. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I have a really exciting and special show for you. 2 authors join me today. Nicole Galland joins me first, and then in a little bit, we're going to conference in Neal Stevenson. These 2 authors have a brand new project that is just releasing called The Rise and Fall of Dodo, and it looks to be fantastic and fascinating. So welcome to the show, Nicole.
Thanks, Hank. How are you?
Great. I begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Oh, my gosh. Wow. I wasn't expecting that one. I think it goes back farther than I can even, put words to. I think it just seemed like something that always seemed like exactly the right thing to do. I have so many fond childhood memories of my grandmother reading to me, and it felt like being human. being part of a storytelling tradition just felt like being human. So I don't think that there was a moment. I think it was one of those things I grew up just assuming was supposed to happen.
I love that answer, and I tend to agree with you. I think that storytelling is a very human thing, and of course that's how our species survived for thousands of years. Is that because we told stories to one another, and then when you decide to take that and become a writer, that's a little bit different thing. But I do think that is a very human thing and something that we're all connected by.
Yeah. And then the writing part of it, I think, had to do with being such a really shy, insecure kid, and it was easier to, and being in an environment where it didn't always feel safe to express my thoughts aloud, so writing was safe. There was an element of that as well. And I think those two things kind of merged when I was maybe 10 years old. And then it just seemed like, this is how you get through life. You write, you tell stories by writing them down.
What sort of stories really intrigued you?
When I was a kid, I was the writer that I was the most obsessed with was a writer named Susan Cooper, who wrote a series of books called The Dark is Rising. And the best way to describe her work, it's sort of fantasy, but it's got a speculative fiction element to it. The premise is essentially, what if King Arthur really did exist and there was some magic going on, or magic's not even the right word, with Merlin, and that world, if that world existed through time and there was still elements of it today. That's a very poor and underrepresented description, but that's kind of what it was at. And when Harry Potter came along, I remember thinking, oh, that's the next generation Susan Cooper. And then, of course, J.K. Rowling turned out to be a lot more than that from a commercial perspective. And Tolkien, Lewis, I feel like I want to say, oh, the usuals, but I suppose that's not usual for everyone. But definitely an element of things beyond what happens on this planet in this day.
Yeah, I really like that. I love to kind of peel the layers back to see what's really going on behind the thing. So yeah, I have a shared appreciation with you for those types of stories. When you decided to become a writer, what sort of things did you start writing for yourself when you were pursuing this as a career and as a passion?
Well, I really backed into it in the most absurd way. I could take you through like a very quick tour of how that happened.
Yeah. I
had always wanted to write, and I had been drawn, because I like Susan Cooper and Tolkien and Lewis, I had been drawn to that sort of, humans who are living a life that's different from regular conventional humans. That's kind of what I was always drawn to, which, coming full circle, is a lot of what Dodo is about. So I feel like, in a way, this was the perfect project for me to get to do with Neal, because there was a real full circle going on there. But I was also an actor. My background for a long time was in theater. And so first I was an actor, and then I felt like I wanted to have something to say about what all of the different characters were doing, which you can't do if you're an actor, but you can if you're a director. So then I became a stage director. And then I thought, I still don't have control over what everyone's doing, because I can rehearse people, but then once the show is up, they can do whatever they want on stage. So then I decided I wanted to be a film director, because then I absolutely could control the final product. And I read all those little How to Be books, and they all said the hardest thing is finding your first script to film, because no one's going to want to give you their script for free, but you won't have any money because you'll be starting out. And I thought, well, that's easy. I'll just write a screenplay and then I'll film it. So I wrote a screenplay, and it won an award, but I never found the money to make it. And as soon as it won the award, all sorts of exciting things happened. Susan Sarandon was attached to it. Luis Mandoki was going to direct it. And I thought, oh, that was easy. Obviously, I'm supposed to be a screenwriter, which is cool, because when I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer. So I'll be a screenwriter. So I moved to L.A., and the whole thing fell apart, which happens to everyone almost. And then while I was sulking in my boyfriend's bedroom for a year, not talking to anyone, I rediscovered a novel that I had started to write in college and obsessed on it just because it was something that wasn't a screenplay. And when I finished it, my agent showed it to a literary agent who sold it 10 days later.
Oh, wow. Which book was that?
It was The Fool's Tale, which was my debut novel, which is historical fiction. It doesn't involve a fantastical element, but I was drawn to Wales, medieval Wales, which is where the story is set, because of those early books that do have a very strong Welsh influence.
So not large aquatic mammals, but the eastern edge of England. Gotcha.
That's correct. The western.
Western. Excuse me. I'm looking at the globe in my mind from the top down. So gotcha. So that's fantastic. So I'm assuming that having that book published kind of changed your life, or at least changed your perspective on what you should be doing and kind of what your artistic expression should be.
It did both. Yes, absolutely. Often when you're being interviewed, people like to ask you, like, what book changed your life the most? And I always have to say my debut novel, because then suddenly I was a novelist.
Right.
And the minute that you've done that, everyone thinks that everything you did up until that moment was leading to your becoming a novelist. But until that moment happens, you're not actually at all sure what you were doing in all those years before it.
Oh, man, if only we had the benefit of hindsight in those times where we feel like we're floundering. If we could say, a year and a half from now, everything will be better and everything will have changed,
It's all going to make sense. You're going to see how this was a necessary step.
Right.
But so often it isn't. Now, that's just me. I'm sure if you ask Neal that question, he will have a very, very different path to where he is now.
I'm sure. And we're going to bring him in just a few minutes. But how did you follow up The Fool's Tale? What did you feel pressure to follow that up with another successful book? And kind of how did you go from there?
I felt elated that I had the opportunity to do it.
I love that.
Especially because when they bought The Fool's Tale, they also optioned the next two books. So in a sense, they were giving me a 2-book deal. And I had but I didn't know, there wasn't any, The Fool's Tale had been sitting in my computer for 14 years before I finished it.
Oh my goodness.
I didn't know what to do next, but I'd gotten so into the habit of walking into bookstores and going to the medieval European history section that I just did that. The first time I didn't need to do that, I did it anyhow, and pulled a book off the shelf without thinking about it that was a 13th century poem, fell in love with the poem, and then adapted it into a novel. So I felt like there was a flow to it. There was a flow to what was supposed to happen next.
So what changed that you had the idea for this book sitting there for 13 or 14 years, and then all of a sudden you were able to finish it? What changed?
I hadn't looked at it in about 5 years, and a lot of things happened in my life on a personal level, including surviving some really intense trauma that we don't need to go into now. But because of the survivor that I had become, all of a sudden I knew how to end the story. And that's the first thing that I wrote, in fact, when I re-encountered it after 5 years and thought, wow, this is what I need to write now. And I wrote the ending, and then, which had eluded me for 14 years. And then I went back and I rewrote the rest of the book. Yeah.
Well, not to get too overly philosophical, but I feel like that probably will mean something to someone that's listening. That, of course, you would never have chosen to go through that trauma, but being a survivor of that actually unlocked something creatively. So that's a wonderful end to something terrible.
Yes, I would agree with that, and I hope that it does touch someone. And I would not encourage that as a means of being inspired. I don't think you should go out and get yourself traumatized. But
right.
But if there is trauma there, chances are there's a way that you can reclaim part of yourself by going into it and seeing what you can pull out.
Yeah, I like that. That's great. So you've published 6 novels on your own: The Fool's Tale, Revenge of the Rose Crossed, I, Lago, Godiva, and Stepdog.
Yes.
Is there a common thread to the types of books that you write?
It's funny you should ask that, because the easy answer is they're historical fiction, except for the one that isn't. And then just this morning I was thinking about the book I'm writing now, which, like Stepdog, is a sort of a modern, contemporary, almost romantic comedy. And the theme that I think runs through all of my books is that there's always someone that has a terrible secret, and is trying to deal with their secret and what are they going to do about it. Like on a very big picture scale, that's people dealing with uncomfortable secrets is sort of a theme that I didn't know I had. Otherwise, generally speaking, it's historical fiction, and I also seem to be preoccupied, without consciously being aware of it, about how people navigate power, which is what history is largely a study in that anyway, really.
Right. Fascinating. I think we'll put links to all of your work in the show notes, and I think there'll be a lot of people that will be really interested to dig into your back catalog. Let's bring Neal into the conversation. Let's talk a little bit about this great joint project that you're doing and how you guys got connected and all of that.
Terrific.
Okay, so we had a chat with Nicole for a few minutes and talked a little bit about how she got started in writing. Neal, I'd like to ask you the same question that I started with Nicole, and that is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Well, I got interested in it when I was in elementary school, I think, and one day one of my friends showed up to school wearing leather shoes. Until then, we'd all worn sneakers, and I didn't like leather shoes because they were uncomfortable, and so I began thinking about if I could find a occupation that would enable me to not wear leather shoes.
I love that. So how did that equate to storytelling for you?
Well, I was an avid reader, and I made some efforts when I was 10, 11, 12 years old to try to write some science fiction stories of my own. Had an interest in it for a while, and never was able to make a whole lot of headway because I think the advice that's typically given to people who are starting out with writing is that you should begin with small things, journal entries, short stories, and work your way up to bigger projects. And that sounds logical, but I actually don't think it's very good advice if you're a novelist, because if you're a novelist, what you're good at and the way you think tends to be longer form work.
Good point.
I think I agree with you. So the conventional wisdom is start with something small that you can wrap your brain around, figure out how to, give it a beginning, middle, and end. But you're saying that doesn't necessarily translate to if you're wanting to write full-length fiction, you need to go ahead and do it.
Yeah, if it works, that's great. I'm in favor of anything that works. But for me, I found it frustrating and kind of demoralizing until I was in college. I just sat down and wrote a whole novel.
And what was that novel? Did you go on to publish that one?
No. That doesn't matter. But the point is that it was full length, and it was of that scope.
Sure. You have written some of the kind of the defining pieces of literature for our generation, if you will, and some that definitely have helped to define a genre. What was your fascination with science fiction and cyberpunk? Where did that come from?
Well, of course, I was born in 1959, and I didn't hear the word cyberpunk until 1984, probably, when I was, I guess I would have been in my mid-20s by that point. So science fiction, until that point, science fiction was just, science fiction as we generally knew it until those days. So it was Star Trek and Lost in Space and Heinlein and Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke, and, all of the golden age of science fiction kind of classics. And I just dug it because I was into science and rockets, and I grew up in a town and in a family that had a lot of engineers and scientists, so that was just kind of a natural thing for me to be interested in. Cyberpunk came along at a moment when I had gone for a while without reading a lot of science fiction. Had been reading more of what we call literary fiction, and when I became aware of Neuromancer by William Gibson, it made a big difference to me, because here was a case where somebody was writing science fiction that was definitely science fiction and really good science fiction, but was also using the style and tone of literary fiction to come at it from a new angle. And it hadn't occurred to me until that point that you could combine those two things. So I found it exciting, and it got me thinking about that again.
Yeah, I think Neuromancer kind of opened a lot of our eyes to those eventualities, and you went on to do a Snow Crash, and then even some really great speculative fiction like Seven Eves that was, I think President Obama even recommended that book a couple of years ago. What an awesome! I can only imagine if the President of the United States recommends your book, that's got to be an obvious honor.
Bill Gates liked it too.
Who's that?
Bill Gates.
Yeah, well,
too.
It was definitely a surreal a moment, and an exciting moment when it happened. Yeah,
absolutely. You also wrote a piece called "In the Beginning Was the Command Line" that I read a number of years ago, and it was really cool to me that this guy that was writing really cutting edge science fiction was also a real life geek with real geek cred. Are you still immersed in computer culture? And I know that the times have changed in that a lot of the tools that we use now have kind of become mainstream and tools. But is there still some fascination with technology and figuring out how things work?
Yeah, no, I'm still in touch with that. I mean, there's not just one computer culture anymore, of course. So there's all kinds of different subcultures, different computer languages, different communities that use technology in different ways. But I'm I still write code. I still am in touch on a pretty regular basis with code writers and people who make technology for a living.
That's great. We were talking to Nicole earlier, and Nicole comes from this great historical fiction background, and we talked just a little bit about this new project that you guys are doing together, The Rise and Fall of Dodo. How did this come about, and kind of which one of you two did this start with, and how did you connect with each other?
Well, we had known each other for quite a while, and we had worked together on a previous combined historical fiction project called the Mongoliad. So the idea for Dodo kind of popped into my head one morning a few years ago. I just sort of I sat down and kind of wrote out the rudiments of it, and got to thinking it would make a rewarding book project, and I also thought that it's an obvious opportunity to collaborate again with Nicole, so that's how that happened.
Gotcha. Nicole,
and I said yes.
I was going to say, what did you think when he pitched this idea to you?
Oh, I loved it. It was so exciting. It was the prospect, first of all, of working with Neal again was delightful, but the particular story felt almost like he had come up with it as something that would be fun for me personally to work on. It just, as I was saying earlier, the particular things that I was drawn to in fiction when I was younger, it's like he was offering them all to me on a silver platter. So I said yes.
Well, and that's what I was thinking about when we were talking about that earlier, is that it sounds like the set pieces of this book are the things that you are super passionate about. So tell us what this book is about. What's the rise and fall of Dodo?
Why don't you do that, Neal?
It's an epistolary novel, so it's told entirely as emails and journal entries and text messages that take place within the archives of a fictitious top-secret government organization called the Department of Diachronic Operations, which is basically an entity that does time travel and uses it for strategic purposes. And so it tells, as the title kind of implies, it tells the story of how this organization gets started as kind of a ragtag sort of grad students project in Boston, and how the organization grows into a huge secret bureaucracy. And there's a particular sort of theory, I guess you could say, of what time travel is and how it works that is embodied in the story, and that informs the kinds of missions that these people have to go on, what they have to do and what they have not to do. And so that's kind of the overall top-level description of it.
Did you include the witches in that?
No.
Well, I never know whether to mention that, because it's like a little bit of a spoiler, right?
I think so, but I also think that they opted to put it on the dust jacket. So. Okay,
well.
Yeah, I read something about witches on a blurb somewhere, so I knew that was. So there's not only time travel but magic as well.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's a mix of high tech sort of science with essentially they come up with a science-based way to make magic possible again. And once they've done that, they find out that a lot of the things that witches used to be good at aren't really that interesting anymore. So, like finding something you lost, or curing the common cold, or things like that, or
takes too long.
They take too long, and we have technological replacements for those nowadays that work perfectly well. But they have certain abilities that are just crazily unexpected and powerful, and one of those is the ability to send people back in time, or forward in time.
When you're dealing with technological issues, when you're writing science fiction, how important is it to make the technology plausible, even though we all know we don't have the capabilities to time travel, at least not yet? But how important is it to make the science believable, so that people can get in and I don't know, as a writer who's inventing things like that, how do you go about?
Yeah, I would say it's not so much about being plausible or realistic as it is about establishing a set of rules and then following those rules in a consistent way.
Gotcha.
So if you look at Star Trek, for example, it's completely ridiculous from a science point of view on a whole bunch of levels. But once they came up with a basic set of rules and capabilities like transporters and phasers and warp drive, they pretty much stuck with that and built a coherent universe around that. And so scientifically sophisticated fans don't care. They're happy to overlook the fact that it makes no sense at all from a pure science point of view, because it's generally handled in a respectful and a consistent way, and so they feel like they're being respected.
Right. And there's a very thin line sometimes between science fiction and fantasy, and sometimes those things blur where you can't tell the difference in one or the other. It sounds like Rise and Fall of Dodo is one of those examples. Nicole, how since you love the fantasy elements, when Neal pitched this to you, could you see in your head how these things would merge and could be work together in a really unique way?
Yeah, and I mean, part of it was simply the very premise of the story as he gave it to me, but the specific thing that I had loved, because fantasy is one of those broad terms as well, what I had loved was real human beings that we can relate to who appear to be living lives like us, who would get immersed into something that is not our conventional experience of reality. And it's the fact that that's what was happening to these people because of the time travel that was so attractive. And a number of friends of mine over the course that I was, while we were writing it, said, really, Neal Stephenson wants to write a book about magic? And I said, well, he has a scientific explanation for it. And they would go, oh, well, that makes sense then.
I love it.
So anything that comes out of Neal's mouth is going to have some science or technological-based premise. So it was there innately. But it was fun to be able to take that kind of smart and then go in a different direction with it.
Love it. Neal, you talked about earlier your love of literary fiction, and especially when literary mixes with science fiction and techno thrillers and that sort of thing. When you were laying out this book and conceiving of it, did the characters come to you and their particular situations? Because that's one of the hallmarks of literary fiction is that we have deep character studies. Did you just get a plot for this and an idea, or did the characters start kind of coming alive to you as well?
Well, I would say it's a hallmark of all kinds of good fiction, but in this particular case, there was this is basically an ensemble novel, and we have a basic core group of 5 people, and we see how those people come together, and then as the story progresses, some more people are added to that ensemble. But they're all sort of types of people that one can imagine seeing around around Harvard, around Boston, and what I guess starts to make it interesting is when they come together in a particular weird set of circumstances, and we get to explore their personalities and their characters as they rub up against each other.
How long did it take the two of you to get the story all written?
It was like a year and a half, maybe.
Yeah, about year and a half to 2 years. It sort of started slowly, and then there was a little over a year of very intensive writing, and then there was cleaning stuff up at the end.
Gotcha. In this type of story, and when writing with a co-writer, what are some of the logistical problems that come up? I think a lot of us who are solitary writers maybe dream up a project and do a loose outline and then write as it goes. But I would imagine when you've got something this intricate, plus writing with another person, what are some of the issues that come up, and how do you solve those when writing in tandem?
I wish I could tell you some kind of story about all the problems we faced and how we overcame terrible difficulties, but it was easy. I mean, writing is hard, but from a logistical standpoint. One of us would just work on it for a while and then email a file to the other. And, we used a spreadsheet to keep track of what happened when. We ran into a few kind of logic issues around time travel where we had to kind of stop and think about it for a bit and try to solve that problem. But I think in general, those led to new wrinkles in the story that were kind of rewarding.
Yeah, that's one thing. One very rewarding thing about the process is that when complications came up, they almost always got managed in a way that they added to the story as opposed to us having to throw something out and not use it anymore.
I would think that using a device like time travel, where usually a story is written linearly, but when you're using time travel and you move your characters back in time, that can complicate things for the rest of the book because the changes that happen. Did you foresee all of the things that time travel would go on to interject into your story, or did you find some happy accidents?
So I had never really been very interested in time travel stories because of the logical contradictions that you find yourself in. But this particular, there's a set of rules with Dodo that govern how it all works, which I think is as far as I know, is kind of a new take on what time travel means, and that eliminated a good number of the kinds of problems that you typically run into when you're trying to write one of these stories.
What about you, Nicole? Did you have any problems wrapping your head around where the story's going when you start time traveling?
I think if I think about anything hard enough, even my own household, I can get really confused about things. But generally, I feel like once you get the basic rules of engagement, it's actually not only intuitive, but in some ways almost clear. As you were speaking, Neil, I was thinking about other time travel stories, and I feel like in Connie Willis's books, there is sort of a set of rules in the sense that there's a big bureaucratic thing in place, but a lot of stuff doesn't get explained, and so you're actually, if you're reading one of her books, you're never quite sure how it's going to work out because you don't know what the rules are, because they're laid out so clearly in this one. I think in a funny way it's almost easier to stay unconfused because you understand exactly what the rules of engagement are. Nothing is presumed or left vague.
What are some of the times and eras that you chose to visit in the book, and how did you choose those?
Well, we started with colonial Boston because it would have been an obvious choice just because of some of the characters and their backstories. That was an obvious place to begin, and then that leads to complications that send us a few decades farther back in time and across the Atlantic to Elizabethan London, which happens to be a particular area of interest for Nikki. So it was a great place to kind of turn her loose.
Yeah, that was fun to have an excuse to live in that world. I'm a Shakespeare geek, so I got to indulge in that a little bit.
Love it. Did you guys visit the future?
That is not a part of of what we're trying to do here. So
it also doesn't work with the rules of engagement of time travel as they're understood in this story.
Gotcha. So the name of the book is The Rise and Fall of Dodo. It releases June. I think it will be out when this airs. And Neal Stephenson and Nicole Galland, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you, Hank.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, absolutely. Neal, where can people find you if they want to get plugged in with your work and follow what you do?
Just the publisher's website.
Okay. All right. Nicole, do you have a website we can send people to?
Yeah, NicoleGalland.com. Neil actually has one too. He's just choosing not to think about it at the moment.
Well, I have a website, but I don't, I don't update it a lot. So if you want like announcements of things that are happening now, I think the HarperCollins site is probably the way to go.
Great. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show today. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Stay tuned now for a clip from the Jason Crane series by Richard Glebes. There's a link to the entire series in the show notes. As always, tune in every Tuesday and Friday for new episodes of the Author Stories podcast. Find all of the archives at hankgarner.com. Now on to our clip from the Jason Crane series by Richard Glebes.
Didn't your dad teach you not to trespass? Yeah. Sorry, I'll go. Joey stepped forward, but Hedwig remained motionless, blocking the only exit. No. Someone needs to learn a lesson about respecting other people's property. Joey felt unnerved and panicky. Please, Hedwig. Mr. Van Brunt. Please, Mr. Van Brunt. May I go now? Please? Not such a smart-ass now, are you? His voice grew flat and contemptuous. You little bastards think you run the world, but you have no idea. No idea where your food comes from, what your parents have to go through to put clothes on your back. Humiliating jobs, long hours, going gray, to provide for you. What are you talking about? Life. Real life. You think it's easy, don't you? Don't you? Those stupid adults doing their stupid adult things while you play all day. Well, it's hard. You hear me? It's hard. Joey's breath caught. He knew what Hedwig was capable of. What did you do to Jason? Nothing. Where is he then? Jason's run away from home. I don't believe you. I don't care what you believe. I'm the adult. I ask the questions. What did you do to my son? To Zeph? Is Zeph okay? No, he's not. Zeph is not okay. And it was you, wasn't it? You're the one who did it. Who did what? Who twisted his mind. I haven't done anything to Zeph. Don't lie to me! Hedwig raised a hand, and a fireball blossomed there. Joey had never seen Hedwig's gift before. The man held a piece of hell. His face looked like something carved from driftwood, full of cracks and crevices. His eyes were shadowed and vacant, but glittering with flame, like knotholes full of fireflies. Yeah, someone's mind had twisted, but not Zeph's. Hedwig's gone batshit. Hedwig passed the fireball from one hand to the other. Did Zeph send you for his things? I know you know where he is. He said he was in love with you. Hedwig made it sound as if Zeph had confessed to murder. Is that true? I don't know. Hedwig broke into a wide grin. Well, we can find out, can't we? He's a Pynchon, right? A Pynchon would know. Know what? You're not making sense. It's their gift. The Pynchon gift. My son's a Pynchon, like his whore of a mother. And Pynchons are telepaths. They always know when the people they love are in danger. Joey's eyes had gone wide. He blinked, trying to process the information. Zeph had a gift? For sure? They have a psychic alarm. If you hurt someone they love, they come running. He raised the fireball. So let's find out. Let's find out if Zeph really loves you. Let's see if he's a fag or not. I know he's not. You'll see. He won't feel a thing when I do it. When you do what? When I burn you black. Joey went cold. Hedwig